Joining me now, first-class father, Ross Patterson. Welcome to First Class Fatherhood.
How you doing, man?
All right, let's start right here. How many kids do you have, and how old are they?
I got two kids right now that I know of. I'm sure there's maybe...
Wait, hold on one second there, Ross. It just came in a little bit. Let me just turn my Wi-Fi off real quick.
Yeah, no worries.
Yep. All right, so I'll start there. Okay, how many kids do you have, and how old are they?
I have two children currently. There's probably another 7 to 9 that are out there that I don't know about, like Future or Cromartie. But two that I know for sure that are mine with my wife currently. One is 5, the other one is 1.
Okay, very cool. Did you guys do any kind of like gender reveal deal to find out what you have, or did you wait to the end for the surprise?
No, man. I was one of those dads who was like hell-bent on knowing what the gender was, like as soon as possible. Like day 3, I wanted to know. Basically, as soon as she pissed on that stick, I was like, I've got to know what this is. And I went to every single doctor's appointment, everything, until, and I basically forced the lady into telling me, like, hey, that looks like a penis. Will you just say that it's a boy so I can move on with my life?
Yeah, I'll tell you what, it's funny. With our first one, it was back in, my oldest is 13, so back in like 2005, 2006, my wife would be on the internet. She came up with all these crazy things to do early on, like stick a piece of cheese on her head. If the sides turn white, it's a girl, and pee and Drano, if it changes color. Like, she had all these different things they had online, and then finally we were able to find out what it was there.
What do you have?
I have 3 boys, and then we got the girl on the 4th try. If we didn't get her on 4, we'd have 5 by now, but we got her, and she runs the show over here now.
Really? So your wife was just like, hey, man, I want a girl at no matter what cost, and you were down with that?
I was right there with her. I definitely wanted to have the other side of the coin and get the experience, the other part of the party here. So I was definitely down with that.
You know what's funny is me and my wife weren't, which is probably why we get along so well. She was like, look, I only want boys. Girls are nightmares. And kind of like you said, running the show already. Like, our friends who had girls were like, hey, man, they're awesome, and they'll be the love of your life. And the hashtag daddy girl thing is or girl dad is real, and it's a beautiful thing or whatever. And then when they hit teenagers, it'll be the worst experience of your entire life, and you want to kill yourself every day. And so my wife was just like, man, I've heard too many stories. I just want boys. She's kind of a tomboy, so we had 2 boys, and that was it. We walked away. We're not having it anymore.
All right. And listen, Ross, if you could, man, please just take a minute here to hit my listeners with a little bit about your background and what you do.
Yeah, man. So, I got my start doing, like, stand-up when I was 16 years old out of Atlanta. I always knew I wanted to be an actor and, a comedian and stuff like that. And I went to school for it, studied journalism at Ohio State, and then went to NYU after that and did acting. And then I jumped right in it. I knew I wanted to write, and I knew I wanted to star and stuff. Directing and producing came a little later on in life, but I initially got started off doing like a series of like teen movies. So I started in The New Guy, Accepted, like House of the Dead, things like that. So like my first 10 movies, and then after that, I kind of reached a crossroads where I think it was like 30, and I got an offer to be on this ABC Family series, and it was to play a college kid. So I always looked younger than I was when I was doing these movies, and like, you get to a certain age and you start to feel bad about it. Like when I was in Accepted, I think I was like 27 or 28, and I was with like Blake Lively, who was like 18 years old, and Jonah Hill, who was like 20, and things like that, and I was like, I'm a little older than these people. Like it was starting to feel weird at that point. And I got offered this college show for ABC Family when I was like 30 years old, and it was a 6-year contract. And technically, that wouldn't have put me out of college, so to speak, till I was like 37 years old. And I didn't want to be one of those people who just took the money and then try to get fired off the show. I saw it happen to Katherine Heigl on Grey's Anatomy, and it was just like, because all these TV contracts are 6 years. So I said no, and I passed on it. And since basically all I was getting was like teen movie auditions and things like that, I decided to fire my agent, my manager, open up my own production company, and then write and star and direct in the movies that I wanted to do comedically. So that's what I did, and then I, along the way, ended up selling I want to say 19 screenplays, and then I've rewritten a bunch, big budget movies, more or less ghostwriting credits and things like that. And then I started writing books. My wife got pregnant, and I ended up writing the first ever romance novel for dudes. I was doing a press tour for a movie, and I do a bunch of impressions. And so, a couple radio interviews in a row, they were like, "Hey, man, can you read me excerpts of 50 Shades of Grey as Morgan Freeman?" Which I was doing. So I was like, there she was, lying on the bed, and he whipped her. Things like that. And I was like, finally, after the second and third one, I was like, man, I'll just read this book. So I ended up reading the 50 Shades of Grey book, and I called my agent. He had asked me to write, I had a bunch of agents along the way that asked me to write books forever, but it was too time-consuming, and it seems like, since I was doing so many movies, I was like, man, I don't know if I have time for this, and it's a lot more difficult than writing a screenplay. One book is the equivalent of writing 5 movies, to be honest with you. And my wife got pregnant with our first son, and she had asked, she was like, hey, would you mind taking some time off to spend with me, so that way, you're not off shooting a movie while I'm going through whatever I'm going through. Because she didn't know. It was our first child, and she didn't know what she was going to be experiencing. So I was like, yeah, in the meantime, I'm going to write this book. So it was called A Knight's Cries While He Rides His Steed. It was the first ever romance novel for dudes. And Simon & Schuster ended up buying it, and it ended up blowing up. I wrote the sequel to that, and then I wrote one of my co-hosts on Drinkin Bros podcast, Matt Best. I ended up writing his biography with him. And that ended up being #1 in the world and on the New York Times bestseller list for 9 consecutive weeks. In the midst of that, during the writing of that first book, I had noticed the media format changing in Hollywood, and podcasts were kind of starting to become a thing. And so I started a podcast called Drinkin Bros Podcast with my best friend, all my 4 of my best friends. That just crossed 8 million listeners this month. And then I do a spin-off show called Ross Patterson Revolution with my wife. That's got 1.8 million listeners. And then we opened up a media company, so now we own 5 shows, 5 different podcasts underneath that media company. So that's been pretty time-consuming. And right now, we're putting out around 42 episodes a month, podcast-wise.
Yeah, wow, that's incredible, Ross, and what an awesome career that you've had. And it's great to see all the success you've had here. And now, with all these experiences, I can only imagine a lot of the, on the way up through all of this, a lot of it is self-motivated. You're into yourself, and then all of a sudden now you become a father. How did the experience of becoming a dad kind of change your perspective on life?
Well, it's funny, man, because, the self-motivation thing is extremely true in the entertainment industry, because there is no one that's going to help you, and nobody's really willing either, where it's like, hey, man, are you an actor? Great, I'll put you in something. That's not how it works. Even though the profession itself is, kind of vain and weird, I will say this, man, if you're able to make it, you're cutting through millions of other people out there that are. And same with writing. No one can push you to write a book or a screenplay or whatever. That is all you, all by yourself most of the times. Some people have writing partners and things like that. And it's tough. Now, when I had kids, it was sort of the same way, where it was like, if you were ever down in your motivation or self-belief in something, taking care of a child and putting food on the table and, a roof over their head, nothing will make you work harder than that, than having children, because once children come into the picture, it's something that, you love more than anything else in this world, and you will go to the ends of the world to protect them and help them and do anything you can for them. Therefore, it even increases your work ethic further. So I feel like I'm working harder with children than, I almost was without, which almost seems impossible, but it's true. For this, the new book that it is due in the fall. The last one just came out. It just got off the New York Times bestseller list in November, and I already owe another one in August, and it's like I'm writing that at night, doing podcasts in the day, and then, spending time with them as soon as I come home from work. So that is always in the back of your mind when you have children of, hey, man, I've got to keep my foot on the gas because I want them to have the best life possible, or a life that you didn't have necessarily.
Yeah, very well said. And Ross, what you said there earlier about, the trajectory of Hollywood changing, it's awesome now that the opportunity is there for everybody to kind of speak their own mind and have the ability to put out their own podcast, their own, version of how they see things unedited, in a sense. A lot of people ask me this, and I'm not really sure how to answer it. I'm curious to see how you would answer. Where do you see, I know podcasts, I kind of got into this just as they were starting to really become so popular. Where do you see the podcast industry going 5-10 years down the line? Where's this all heading?
Yeah, I mean, look, I can tell you, because I've taken these meetings for a while, and we've had massive offers, right? Like 7-figure offers of buyouts. And that's what's happening right now, currently in the podcasting landscape. So you take a company like Spotify. This year alone, they're spending $500 million acquiring podcasts. They're going to people like Amy Schumer and saying, hey, here's $1 million. Create a podcast that is exclusive to us. Kevin Hart, they just signed a deal with The Ringer. They just signed a deal with, and then in particular, media companies. So, like Barstool Sports. Barstool just sold 36% of their company for $150 million. That means their current valuation is $450 million for their company.
Wow.
And, before that, the Chernin Group had already put in $17 million and owned about 51% of it. And, within 3 years, they were able to triple that investment without doing anything, really. Because there is no comedies being made in Hollywood anymore, with the Me Too movement and the fucking cancel culture and all that stuff that's going on, podcast is the only unedited, unfiltered way to get comedy or share opinions, or find shared opinions that are on the same level as you are. My humor is extremely crass and dark and over the top, and I love that. I cannot get that through movies anymore. I can't even finance these movies anymore that I used to make. And it is for the reason of, the reasons of what I just said. However, podcasts are free, man. You can say whatever you want. And if you're going to make them financially viable, there is sponsors out there that are willing to do that. All of our sponsors, the one rule is, hey, man, I read it however I want to. And you can't stop me from what I'm going to say, because I know that's what the listeners want. Right? If I give a straight read, it's not going to be the same, read or the same type of tone as the rest of my show. So listeners will be pissed off about it. And the sponsors have come around to that. And eventually, here's where I see it going way into the future. Is Spotify is trying to become the Netflix of audio. They've already stated that in like numerous meetings I've had over there. They don't even want music anymore. Because they don't want the royalties for all of these songs and all that shit. They just don't want to deal with it anymore. So what I think is going to be happening is I think personal companies are going to be buying out individual podcasts and giving them equity inside the companies. I know Onnit did it with Joe Rogan, and I think that is going to be the new future. And some of the sponsors that we're dealing with now are bigger, where they don't want a promo code for anything. It's just like, hey, man, here's a product. Just have it on your show because it's cool to be on your show, and we'll pay you X amount of dollars to do that. But I would say way in the future, individual companies will start buying out shows. In the next 5 to 10 years, it's going to be all Spotify and iTunes buying out shows, and Luminary. Luminary is offering $1 million per show as well, but they're on a paywall platform where, a Luminary you have to subscribe to like a Netflix where it's like $11.99 a month. We're not going to do something like that because it's, that's going to turn off half of our listeners, and we don't want to charge them for it. We make enough money off of sponsors that it's not necessary. Now, if somebody like a Spotify came in, backed up the truck and said, hey, man, I don't know, let's just take that murder show. I think they got $4 million a year. We would definitely do that because Spotify is still free, and so is iTunes. So I don't hold a loyalty to iTunes or anywhere else. As long as the listeners can get it for free and somebody's willing to pay for it, we're down with that. And that is currently happening, and we've had a bunch of offers on the table for that. But in the future, I think it is going to be companies that are just straight up buying out people. We were approached by one already that was a company that I'd never even heard of, and they were like, look, we want you to sell like outdoor stuff and jackets and hunting equipment and all that stuff, and you're only going to read for like the 7 or 8 companies that we own. And it's like, oh man, well that's different. I've never heard of something like that. that I think is going to be the future, depending upon what you do. You know, for yours, being like fathers and stuff like that, like it would make sense for like a baby Bjorn to buy out all the children's podcasts, you know, or fathers or mothers or stuff like that, or Honest, you know, Jessica Alba's company. Like it would make sense to own it and then constantly be promoting their products on it.
Yeah, that's very cool, Ross, and that's encouraging, too, for the future, and it opens up the door for so many people to get involved in it. And I know one of the big things, too, that's on the rise, Gary Vee is always talking about it, is TikTok, very popular with the kids. Have you gotten your kids into the act at all here with the TikTok? You got them set up with a channel already?
I haven't, and it's funny you ask that because, you know, everybody in the entertainment industry, like, we get asked that all the time, like, were your kids going to do it? I don't want my kids to do it, per se, simply because what their parents do, because my wife's an actress as well. If they want to do it, by all means, but I'm not going to push them into it. Whereas, you know, I think my kid is funny and interesting or whatever. I don't know what the outside world will think. I also don't know what the feedback is going to be. Because let's face it, social media and the comments you get are brutal. And I'm hoping, with a hard air quote around the word hoping, that my kids aren't interested in it, because I've seen like kids in the neighborhood where like TikTok has destroyed their life, and in like a weird way, you know, kids will get on there and say like mean shit about other kids, and you're like, oh God, dude. And then I've also seen the other side of like TikTok where it's like, man, like Will Smith now has a TikTok and Kevin Hart and those guys, and it's like, to me, they're too old to be on that platform. It should be just for kids. Because when it's not for kids, it's not going to be cool anymore, and it's like, I think it'll be a flash in the pan, TikTok, I think. I don't see how it's really that much different from Instagram stories. And once older celebrities start getting into it and start ruining it, once Gwyneth Paltrow gets into it, it's over for TikTok.
Yeah, and it's funny that you say, like, just because I never had any social media accounts at all until I started this podcast up almost 2 years ago now. And Twitter especially, I couldn't believe, like, I would just get hammered on there depending on what guests I brought on. And I don't even talk politics, but if I have somebody that's on the show, like I had Eric Trump on the show recently, and it's like I got destroyed on there. We don't even talk 1 ounce about politics on the show, but it's like I couldn't believe the comments that I got from all that stuff.
Yeah, man, and it's, you know, Twitter is hell on earth, essentially. Like, it's, you don't know what's real, what's not, what's for politics, what's not. Like, you take your Eric Trump interview, you know, a lot of those are just bots or paid people to come on and argue with you about politics because it'll, you know, be some way tied to or connected to or hashtagged to some other agenda they're pushing. And it's like, man, I don't even know who's real and who's not real on Twitter. And it's a place to go and rage and vent and hate the world. And it's like, you know, again, I don't want my, hopefully my kids exposed to it until they're older, but, you know, I'm also not going to prevent them from that. So, but it's one of the, social media is a necessary evil for having podcasts or books or things like that. And look, man, I would say that's one of my biggest regrets is I was late to the social media game. When I was coming up, starring in all these movies, they were like, look, do not put any of, you know, your personal life on social media whatsoever. You want to remain a mystery. That way people can believe you in all these roles you're doing and things like that. And then one night, like, you know, I got a phone call from like a panic publicist in like 2013. It was like, put everything out there. Everybody needs to know everything. And I was late. And, you know, I have other friends who have made millions off of YouTube and everything else, simply because they were the first ones to do it and get into the platform ahead of everyone. I feel like I kind of did the same thing in podcasts where, you know, we started 5 years ago and there wasn't that much competition. I mean, for a while, we were number 3 in the world in comedy behind Rogan.
Wow.
So, yeah, but with, you know, with anything, like, dude, as soon as podcasts started getting big, you know, now every celebrity and their mother has a podcast, and it's like, they're not even good so much. Like, you know, like Conan O'Brien. I love Conan O'Brien, and I think he's rad. The fact that he's able to come out with a podcast and knock us off the, you know, out of the top 10 overnight sucks. Like, dude, you're rich enough. You already have a talk show on. Like, now you're going to do a podcast, which is essentially just kind of your show. Same with, like, you know, The Daily Show, and, you know, today was Stephen Colbert's, and it's like, those people don't even care about the art of podcasting or the format of it. It's just a money grab, and they think that they need to get their name out there more because, let's face it, man, I have more listeners than Stephen Colbert has viewers on a nightly basis.
Wow. Yeah, that's incredible. Well, you've built up your audience, too, and you've done a great job doing that as well.
Oh, thanks, man. I appreciate it, but that's also the reason why people are jumping into it, where we're reaching more people than, every basic cable show on television. Every day I go on air, I'm reaching more people than anybody on FX or the ratings on FX or Adult Swim or, any of your favorite shows. And I get why people are hopping into it. It's just like, I wish they cared about it more, Yeah.
Hey, Ross, let me rein this back into you as a dad here. I know they're young yet, but what type of disciplinarian are you as a dad here so far? Are you a spanker, a timeout guy? How do you handle discipline?
Both. Like, I'll spank in timeout, simply because, in my opinion, this helicopter parenting or, there's another word that's, you'll know it, man. What do you call those parents who are just like, they'll talk to their children in a nice way, or, they won't disagree with them, or they want to hear their thoughts on things, at 5 years old. And it's just like, dude, we're not doing that. If you scream or cry or throw a tantrum in a restaurant, like, you're getting taken home. If you say the wrong, thing or don't do your homework like you should, because, like, I don't know about your child, but, like, in kindergarten, my kid's got homework. Like, he's got to read books and stuff. And if he talks back and things like that, like, yeah, you're going into timeout. Or if you push your brother down, knock him down the stairs or whatever, like, you're going to get a spanking for that. Some parents aren't cool with that. Like, that's how I was raised, and that's what I believe in, so that's what I do. But, it's a different world as far as parenting goes, and I've seen it both ways. And I haven't seen it in a positive way for just sitting there and letting your children do whatever they want. I've seen it in a positive way in the other. So that's what me and my wife believe in. Is that right for everybody? Not necessarily, but that's what we do.
Yeah, and what's funny about that, Ross, too, is, I have 4 kids, so each one of them requires sometimes a different style of discipline. One kid, you could smack him all day long, he ain't going to listen. The other guy, you can threaten to smack him, he's going to listen right away. So everyone responds a little differently, but a lot of the successful people that I'll have on the show here, whenever I ask them that, I'll say, is the discipline style different than you grew up with? They'll say, oh, yeah, I grew up getting spanked and getting punished hard, and I don't really do. But it made them in some way, they're all very successful, and it didn't ruin their life. And I think we've gotten to the point here where the participation trophies and all this stuff has really started to ruin a lot of our society. That, combined with the fact that so many kids are growing up without a father in their life, I think is definitely causing a lot of trouble in our society.
Yeah, I do too, man. So that's why I don't subscribe to, like, oh, it's a different time than when we grew up. It's not. Family values are still family values, and the way you're raised will determine more than likely the person you're going to be in life. Just because we have, different electronics now, iPads and things like that, doesn't mean you change as people, and it doesn't change like a discipline style within you. And I'm raising my kids the same way that I was raised. I came from loving parents. I don't have a bad word to say about my childhood, but yeah, I was spanked, man, and I was in timeout. And if I did things wrong, like, same with my kids, they're gonna learn and know about it. I'm not going to treat them any differently just because the rest of society is starting to. And I just hate this soft mentality that is kind of out there in the world today, where it's just like, man, if you rate them like that, first of all, they're going to run all over you and do whatever they want. Second of all, they'll probably be living in your house until they're 33 years old, which is not healthy either.
Yeah, I think there's definitely an issue with it, and hopefully it's stuff like this. The conversations can start to spread more about the problems that it is causing. My father. There was a generation gap there. My dad had me when he was 50 years old, so he was born in 1930. So he grew up with a completely, tremendously different discipline style, and then obviously it's a lot different the way I am with my kids. It's not that extreme, but I think that old school style of parenting, I think a lot of it is necessary, and I think a lot of it would start solving some of the trouble that we see here. And has becoming a dad, has that changed at all your trajectory of the type of content that you're producing?
No, and it's tough. Like, before I got started, because my content is extremely aggressive comedically across the board, movies, books. Not this last one, but the book before was banned on Amazon for like 3.5 weeks before it got overturned, just because of how graphic the content was. I always said I did not want a father to affect what I thought was funny comedically in the world, and I've stuck by that. And I'm sure there will come a point when my son is 13 years old and catches a movie that I did, or listens to a podcast, or sees a video on YouTube, and he's like, "Dad, what the hell, man?" And then I'll sit down and explain to him what I do for a living and why, and also what I think is funny to me personally. And I was very adamant about that when I had kids, and I talked to my wife about it too. I said, "Look, I don't want to change what we're doing content-wise just because we have children." I have a lot of friends who have changed that, and I would say their careers suffered for it because once you switch audience-wise what you used to do, and that's how you developed your fan base, well, chances are that fan base is going to leave. And so I was very adamant about not going soft with my content, even though I had kids. Now, do I let them listen to it or watch it? Absolutely not. When they come of age and they find it on their own, fantastic. But as a parent, I don't let them listen or watch it. But later on in life, yeah, I'll sit down and explain to them why Dad does what he does and why I think it's funny.
Yeah, very well said. And Ross, what was the transition like for you going from one child to having two?
Boy, it was night and day, man. It left less time for me and my wife, and it was hard. It was really hard because both of our kids, when they were babies, were, and look, I have a 1.5-year-old now. They were difficult children. They were colicky, so and I don't really know why. There is no explanation for it, obviously, and it clearly didn't affect my oldest one as he got older, because once they he wasn't a baby anymore. He's the nicest, sweetest child on the planet. I also don't believe he's mine because of it, but it's great. But having a second one that was just as colicky as the first, with our work schedules picking up, in particular, my wife has a spinoff show, and that exploded, Drinkin' Broettes, and it's like, it's tough, man, because now you're dealing with two instead of one. I will say this, well, the gap of 4 years in between the two children has helped. But look, you have less time and all that other stuff. And not that I'm going to bitch about it either. Like, I love both children, and I'm amped. And it's cool that, he's got a brother and all that stuff. So, I'm amped about it, but it's definitely less time with one another. And it puts a strain on your relationship for a little bit.
Yeah, and I hear you with the colic. My oldest was the only one that we had that had that colicky stuff. We had to get him that, like, Neutron Magene orange can with the bunny on it. It was like $10 a shot.
Dude, yeah, all that stuff, man. You name it, any one of those drinks or juices or tablets, like, across the board, we've given them, where it's like, hey, take this little tablet of, whatever those, like, dissolvable things are. And, we tried all of them. None of them really worked. And it was just a thing of, like, once they hit two, once my oldest hit two, he was out of it, and hopefully the second one won't be the same, but we're still kind of going through it right now.
Yeah, it's definitely cheaper if you get them drinking from the tap. You've had so much success here already, Ross. What kind of plans or goals do you have here for yourself for the future?
The media company is the biggest one right now. The power in, being able to reach between the 4 shows that we have now, we're essentially reaching 11 million people a month, 11, 12 million people a month, and expanding it and giving people their own voice that I think are talented, who fit within our mold. We just signed Dakota Meyer last week, Medal of Honor recipient, for his own show, and Derek Wida we just signed, who's massively talented, and just giving people a voice, and building a network of people who believe in the same things that you do and find funny is important, because, man, I loved comedy movies more than life itself, and that's why I even got into the entertainment industry and became a stand-up and all stuff early on. And once that went away, the comedic films themselves, like, it was a downer for me. So I truly feel if you're going to get the most aggressive comedy you can right now, it is through podcasts, or maybe Danny McBride's show, The Righteous Gemstones, but that's about it these days. So that's kind of my main focus. And then, the ultimate dream would be to have my books turned into a series for HBO. The third one comes out this fall, and that would be the end-all, be-all. So I think that will eventually happen at some point, but we'll see. I could have pissed somebody off politically or said something along the ways that would prevent that. I don't know anymore. Like, networks and studio execs have gotten so over the top with, tweets in your, from 10 years ago and things like that, that it's like, man, I have no idea what I did or said 10 years ago. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, very cool. Yeah, I respect the vision. And you mentioned Dakota Meyer there. I was fortunate enough to have him on the show as well. He's a top-notch guy all the way around. So,
dude, one of the most genuine, honest people you will meet. And, man, he is a hell of a talent. And his podcast needs to become bigger. So we just signed on with him to help him with that. And he's been a close friend for 5-6 years now. So I know his whole story, and he's a great dad. Loves his kids more than life, same as me, and we share the same values.
Yeah, awesome. I can't wait to see where that goes for him. Last thing I want to hit you with here, Ross, I love to ask all the dads that I get on the podcast, what type of advice do you have for the new dad or for that about-to-be father who's out there listening?
Whew, that is a big, big question. The advice that I have is, no matter how many people you ask, how many current dads you ask, you will be completely unprepared for it. And you will do things and have failures with being a father that are unavoidable just because you're a new parent. And no matter who you ask, you will still be unprepared for the task at hand of being a father. And I will say, it is the greatest job in the world, and it is the greatest joy you will ever have, is being a father. And it's amazing, and has completely changed my life for the better in every way. But you will be unprepared, and there is truly nothing like it on this earth. So you can ask as many questions to all your friends as you want, but you won't know until literally the second that baby pops out and the nurse hands it to you, of what it is like to be a father. And you'll never experience anything like it.
Yeah, very well said. I love the message. This has been an honor for me. I got to say, Ross Patterson, you're a first-class father all the way, and thank you so much for giving me a few minutes of your time on First Class Fatherhood.
Absolutely, man. Thanks for having me.